Hello, everyone. I am Father Deacon Aaron Taylor, and this will be my attempt to reproduce in the still solitude of my study a lecture that I originally presented to a live audience. So the dynamic here for me is going to be really different, talking into a computer camera than it is actually talking to a live group of people. But I'll do my best to see to kind of be lively and personable, even though there's actually no other human being in the room with me at the moment. So the title of the lecture is, well, actually, this lecture doesn't have its own title, really. It's the class that this is meant to introduce is titled The Medieval Imagination, Lectures and Readings in the Literature and Thought of the Western World, from Late Antiquity through the Renaissance. So this is an introduction lecture to a class with that title, a course that I'm intending to last all year long, basically. So the title mentions the medieval imagination, and focusing on, which suggests a focus on the Middle Ages here, right? But the subtitle shows the inclusion of everything from late antiquity, roughly around the sack of Rome by the Vandals in 410, to really through the Renaissance, which in some ways kind of begins around the time of the fall of Constantinople in 1453, but will continue, at least in some form or another, and particularly in England in some ways, up through the middle of the 17th century. So we're going to be reading and discussing texts all throughout that time period, basically, a period of well over 1,000 years. In his famous lecture to inaugurate his position as the chair of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge University, C.S. Lewis advanced an argument that the fundamental change in Western civilization does not fall between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And remember, he was trying to justify including medieval and Renaissance literature together in this single position. And so he argued that the fundamental change really for Western culture really occurs around the Industrial Revolution, about 1800, with the idea of progress, which he argues is an idea that's closely connected with the development of machines and the perfectibility of technology, right? He points out that earlier people were basically unanimous in believing that things were generally best in the beginning and had gotten progressively worse as time went on. Now, I think that Lewis makes a true and important point here, but my intention in this class is really to focus on another theme than this one of a sort of primeval golden age followed by a long decline. What I want to focus on is a theme that's really already eclipsed in many ways by the end of the 17th century. So thus providing a kind of rationale behind the particular period that these readings are intended to cover. My theme here is what I like to call enchantment, which is an idea that I think is really sort of well captured in Gerard Manley Hopkins's famous and much anthologized poem, God's Grandeur, when he says, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God." Now, obviously, Hopkins is not a poet writing in our period. He's a Victorian poet, but he's expressing an idea that I think the writers of our period would very well have agreed with and recognized, if not necessarily in those words. Enchantment, in my mind, represents the idea that everything around us in the world has a surplus of meaning, that it has depth, that it has a deep dimensionality, where the invisible and the material worlds intersect. Everything around us is a sign or a symbol of something else. The air that we're surrounded by is filled with spirits, angelic or demonic, as the case may be, or perhaps even in some cases something in between. Individuals themselves reflect eternal principles, and the species which they compose together are transcendent ideas in the mind of God. By means of the physical, we partake of the non-physical. The non-human world around us, the world of nature and of the sky above us, is a world that is congenial to humans, that wears our face in a certain sense and shares our qualities. In a word, I would say the enchanted worldview is one that sees, and I typically hate that word worldview. I feel badly every time I use it, but it's an idea that everything really is ultimately magic. Everything from stars to the basic elements, and that human beings form a little world, a microcosm in between the stars and the elements that link God or the gods with matter and material things. In my opinion, enchantment in these kinds of terms is a way of seeing the world that is common to primitive animists, from ancient Stone Age cultures to modern Stone Age cultures, to pagan poets and philosophers, whether Homer or Plato, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scribes and theologians. It's really the default human experience in many ways, and what would have been common essentially to everyone, more or less, up through, I think, the period around the end of the 17th century. And the literature of the Western world in our period is a powerful depiction of this experience that is common to humanity. And I think that's a great part of its value. In this understanding, modernity is essentially the end of enchantment. It's a period of secularization. It's been pointed out that one of the mainstays of secularization theory is that modernity disenchants the world, whatever else it does. Now, I won't go into how or why it does this. That's really outside of my expertise, and I'm not really as interested in that question. Various scholars and thinkers and pop, intellectuals will variously connect it with nominist philosophy in the late Middle Ages, with the Protestant Reformation, with the European wars of religion, and with the scientific revolution, and perhaps even the Enlightenment. Now, as I like to poo-poo all of these things from time to time as much as the next guy, although I probably shouldn't, because, like I say, they're really outside of my area of expertise. But also, none of these things by itself really kills enchantment completely. And it's important to remember that even though I keep emphasizing the late 17th century as a period where the enchanted world sort of comes to an end, there are many ongoing later attempts to recover it, more or less. Everything from the Romantic movement, which is probably one of the largest and most well-known attempts at recovery of enchantment, to modern-day films and books like Steven Spielberg's movies or the Harry Potter series and things like that. All of which I think could be argued are attempts to recover enchantment, more or less successful, right? Depending on who you ask. But one common way to talk about enchantment, at least in Christian theology and history, is in terms of the idea of sacramentalism or sacramentality, which are both terms that are derived from the word sacrament, which is famously defined by St. Augustine as an outward and visible sign of an inward and invisible grace. Now, in Christianity, the word sacrament itself is particularly applied to the 7 particular rituals, from baptism to unction with oil, and including ordination, marriage, and particularly the Eucharist. But really, the older Christian view is that all of the world is a sacrament. And this is where we can see it kind of tying into this idea of enchantment, right? Even though the word is so commonly used to refer to particular things, sacramentality or sacramentalism is really kind of a way of seeing everything, right? Where the 7 special sacraments of the church may be seen as summing up or recapitulating the sacramentality of the world in general. But even though this word is, I think, in some ways interchangeable somewhat with enchantment, and is commonly used by certain writers, because sacramentalism can seem so peculiarly Christian, my plan in this class is only to use it in a peculiarly Christian way, and generally to stick with the word enchantment. I would also argue that sacramentalism is really an idea that's not very visual. It's kind of hard to grasp and somewhat limited in scope. Whereas enchantment is something that I think that we can all sort of see together. Now, my one of my preferences too for describing how enchantment is understood or how it works in the period that we're discussing is a term that has all sorts of other difficulties of its own, and that word is hierarchy. Hierarchy is a word derived from Greek. As far as I know, it was invented by the church father known as Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, from Greek words that mean literally sacred and order or principle. Now, the main difficulty with the word hierarchy, of course, is that it's become a bad word nowadays because of the abuse of human hierarchy by wicked people and wicked institutions, right? The abuse of power, right? The word hierarchy has come to be associated with tyranny, with oppression, with exploitation of the poor by the rich, of women by men, of blacks by whites, and of gays by straights, etc. My use of the word hierarchy in this class as a good word is not intended in any way to deny its use either as a concept or as a structure, as a social structure, or to condone it as an historical or present reality, right? I am using hierarchy in a good sense, but not because I think hierarchy has always or necessarily been good, right? I completely recognize that it has been an evil thing in much of human history. Hierarchy has no doubt, without doubt, been used in evil ways, and maybe even primarily. That's a subject up for discussion. In fact, I've written a whole article on this that I'm hoping to publish one day. I submitted it to a friend for publication who was going to put it in a periodical that ended up kind of going defunct. So it has not seen the light of day. But this is something I've given some thought to. So what I want to do in this class, when I refer to the word or the idea of hierarchy, is to retrieve hierarchy as a good thing. And fundamentally, hierarchy in this understanding is an engine or a mechanism that's intended not to force down those who are lower in the hierarchy, or those things, right? We're not just talking about people, but we're talking about the cosmos itself here. But it's not intended to force down the lower parts of the hierarchy. It's intended to lift them up, in fact, to the level of the upper parts, right? What is lower becomes higher by means of the hierarchy. This is precisely how the word was used and defined by that church father I mentioned, Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, who was an important Christian mystic and theologian, often referred to now disenchantedly as Pseudo-Dionysius, because the authorship of the works attributed to him is in doubt. But Saint Dionysius's idea of hierarchy is not, one reason I think this is important is it's not just because of its connection with enchantment itself, with the larger theme of enchantment, but specifically Saint Dionysius's notion of hierarchical structure is something that's a basic ingredient in the medieval model of the universe. So I want to make sure that we understand this clearly. Saint Dionysius makes the goodness of hierarchy, in the sense that I'm hoping to retrieve it, very clear in his treatise, The Celestial Hierarchy, which is mainly concerned with the 9 ranks of angels, where he writes, "In my opinion, a hierarchy is a sacred order," which, if you'll recall, is the literal meaning of the word, "a state of understanding and an activity approximating as closely as possible to the divine, and it is uplifted to the imitation of God in proportion to the enlightenments divinely given to it." And then just a little bit later in the same chapter of the same treatise, he writes, "The goal of a hierarchy then is to enable beings to be as like as possible to God and to be at one with him." Now notice in that first little passage that I read, that word uplifted, anagomeni in Greek. Some form or other of this same expression gets repeated over and over throughout the celestial hierarchy. And it signals, in my mind, that what St. Dionysius is talking about is precisely what I've said, that the hierarchy is not a rigid structure, meant to keep the lower parts of the hierarchy down and keep the upper parts up, but it's something that's meant to lift everyone up towards the divine, to lift all parts of the hierarchy up, right? St. Dionysius says over and over, that through hierarchy, beings are uplifted towards the divine. They are uplifted towards God. And this is the basic function of a hierarchy itself. Now, we'll see that this function is enabled often, most, by the reversal of worldly hierarchies, of worldly human structures of power, right? At some point, I may introduce a distinction here to show that people in our period could see a kind of sacredness to hierarchy that did not necessarily preclude its abuse on a moral level, but on the other hand, the true moral hierarchy was something that was always sort of in the back of their minds. So a good representative quote along these lines is when St. Paul says, God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen. So what we find at the top of the hierarchy in the Christian view of things is not necessarily what we would expect from a worldly perspective of power, right? Now, St. Dionysius's perhaps most suggestive use of the image of the hierarchy is earlier in the Celestial Hierarchy treatise, when he writes, God clothed these immaterial hierarchies in numerous material figures and forms. Notice that connection between the immaterial and the material, going back to enchantment, as I explained it, in a way appropriate to our nature, so that we might be uplifted from these most venerable images to interpretations and assimilations which are simple and inexpressible. For it is quite possible that we humans should, in an immaterial way, rise up to. It is quite impossible. I think I said possible. Sorry. For it is quite impossible that we humans should, in any immaterial way, rise up to imitate and to contemplate the heavenly hierarchies without the aid of those material means capable of guiding us as our nature requires. Hence, any thinking person realizes that the appearances of beauty are signs of an invisible loveliness. Here we see hierarchy is not just an arrangement of like things, but also an arrangement of things that can seem to be very unlike, right? The material is a lower form of being on a hierarchy with immaterial at the top, right? But the beauty of the material beings and the material world around us is intended to uplift us, to remind us and point us towards, ultimately to lead us to the beauty of immaterial things, right? The beauty of the spirit. In this sense, hierarchy is a manner of connection between the invisible and immaterial on the one hand, and the visible and material on the other, that enables the visible and material to participate in or represent, make present the invisible and immaterial. All visible material things have a place in this scheme, but of course some are more powerful than others. And once again, notice St. Dionysius' connection of hierarchical power, the ability of hierarchy to effect this uplifting, right, with beauty. Joy, longing, the desire for beauty, whether in music or painting or flowers or the Grand Canyon, are all things that can literally lift us up in spirit to God to some degree or another, right? Now there's an important qualification at this point, traditionally known as the via negativa. It's a qualification that the eccentric English writer Charles Williams liked to encapsulate in the maxim, "This also is thou, neither is this thou." The via negativa, in this sense, is a kind of reminder that while the world is charged with the grandeur of God, and all these things can be seen as signs and symbols, as sacramentals, right, that are charged, impregnated with the divine, right, and therefore that things are like the divine in some sense, it's also important at the same time to remember that the divine transcends them. Things are like, but also unlike, ultimately, right? That the divine, that God himself and his attributes transcend human understanding. This is another important pole in St. Dionysius' own theology. whereas the perhaps more immanent aspects of the divine are reflected in treatises like the Celestial Hierarchy. The more transcendent aspect is emphasized in his famous short treatise, The Mystical Theology. Now, if we forget that the visible and the invisible, that the material and the spiritual, that the created and the creator are not exactly the same, we commit what Judeo-Christian tradition calls idolatry, mistaking the image for that which is for what it is an image of. Now, since the period of modernity, since the time of disenchantment, the enchanted world has been constantly suspected of idolatry. Stars are just a flaming ball of gas on the modern view. An image of the Virgin Mary is just a plaster statue or a piece of painted wood. A human being is just a trousered ape. Now, the universal message of humanity before modernity is that all of these things, while, yes, in a material sense, being just what we've said, are also much, much more than that. There's more than meets the eye. The inside is bigger than the outside, like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, or Hermione's purse in Harry Potter, right? The modern world of science, of utilitarianism, of capitalism, only really sees the outside of things. But the secret purpose of this class is to enable us also to see the inside, to lift the veil between the material and immaterial just a little bit. Now here, I think I'm giving away an important point. I am not an impartial or objective teacher when it comes to this subject. I hope to inhabit or represent or be a living embodiment of this tradition as much as I possibly can. I see my purpose as functioning, to borrow St. Dionysius's word, hierarchically, or to use another term that he's fond of, to function mystagogically, right? To initiate students into a reality that's pointed to by the books that we're reading, to lift up the readers and the hearers and the students towards that reality, right? Now, not to get too technical for a minute, but for those who are interested in literary theory and hermeneutic philosophy and things like that, I would just indicate that for me, reading is really more of an art than a science. I see myself as a part of the humanist tradition of intuitive reading from within tradition, drawing on tacit knowledge and love for the other in order to interpret the text, right? And this is an idea I've made up. Like I said, this is a tradition that I see myself in. And I would point those who are interested to the work of Gadamer, to some extent Michael Polanyi, Father Andrew Louth's Discerning the Mystery, and Alan Jacobs' wonderful book, The Hermeneutics of Love, if you want to get a better idea of where I'm coming from on how to go about reading books. Also, I'm for many years now, I've been very fundamentally grounded in the work of Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian literary critic and philosopher. So for those who are interested, all of that is out there if you want to get a better idea of where I'm coming from as a reader of Western literature. But ultimately, I really want to put the emphasis on reading as an experience of this enchanted reality. I've spent a lot of time myself staring into the starry climes, and what I want to really do is just share what I've seen. Now, this enchantment is a unifying theme, while the sources that we're going to be reading are very diverse. I don't want anyone to get the idea that this is a theology class or something. Some of the books that we're reading will be prose fiction, some will be narrative poetry, some lyric poetry, some will be philosophy or theology, although I'll probably try to keep that at a minimum. Some might be classified as science or history, and probably all of them are really all mixtures of all of the above. Now, not all of them are great books with a capital G and B, the way that expression is technically used. Some of the things that we're going to read are not part of the famous Britannica series initiated by all those University of Chicago and Columbia guys. But hopefully all of the texts will help lift us up in one way or another. So thank you. That is the end of the formal lecture. I'll go ahead and conclude. I've got, when I did the lecture for the audience, I ended up discussing business, basically sort of where we're going to go forward with the class, how things are going to work. So I'll include a little bit of that now, just to help those who are unable to attend the lectures, whether because of distance or conflicts of time or whatever. So my plan is for the classes to be every other week, at the same time and place if possible. Now, the first lecture was done on a Monday at Divine Life Church in Bethany, Oklahoma. Um, we agreed at the end of the class to move the classes to Wednesday night, but I want to stay pretty consistent with that. I don't want to keep moving the time around. And when I tried to get in touch with Divine Life about moving to Wednesday, I never did hear back. So in the meantime, I've already made plans to hold the next class at All Souls Episcopal Church in Oklahoma City. And if I do hear back from Divine Life, then we might discuss moving back there. But otherwise, I guess we'll just plan to stay at All Souls for the time being. Now, the way that I plan to do this is that for each class, I will suggest readings. I understand that most of the people that are going to be participating are probably not going to find it very difficult to keep up with a full reading load. So I'll try to keep the readings short and manageable to what can be reasonably done within 2 weeks. But if it's just not possible to keep up, there's no sweat. You're still welcome to either attend the classes in person or watch the videos. Obviously, I'm not going to be giving any grades, but you may have a harder time following lectures or participating in the discussions that may arise if you haven't done the readings. So I will encourage you to do that. I'll also suggest translations and editions that you can procure, hopefully, at a reasonable price. And whenever possible, for those who don't mind reading on a screen, I may be able to find online texts of some of these readings. And in a few cases, I'll have to provide photocopies, which hopefully I can scan and send out as a PDF to those who are not physically nearby. Now, as far as the class format goes, my intention is for it mainly to be lecture and to some extent commentary on the readings that we'll be doing. But I do hope to get a little bit more conversational and maybe Socratic with some of those who do participate in the readings and in the classes. And so there's been some kind of indecision over whether whether I will record the lectures that I do for the live class and therefore include the Q&A or do a recording afterwards. So I'm open to suggestions about that. If you think it would be better to get me speaking in front of live students and to be able to participate or at least listen in on that the Q&A and the discussions that we have and things like that, then I'm open to recording the lectures as I give them. Now, like I say, the format is mainly going to consist of lecture and commentary. I want to point out that these books, the texts that we're going to read, assume a lot of stuff that most of us really no longer know or understand. We can't just pick these up and immediately have some profound thoughts to share about them, right? They require lots of commentary, explanation, and hand-holding from a teacher, right, who's done a little bit of this before. Now, I'm not a major scholar. I don't have a PhD, but I have taught all of these texts in one context or another for some years now, and so I've got a little bit of experience, and that's what I plan to offer through the classes, more so than simply discussion. But like I said, some of these sessions may turn into some more discussion, right, as we get into some of the philosophical questions or moral issues that get raised, right? Now, let's see. As for the rest of this business, I've already started a Facebook group. I've got an email list. If you're somehow seeing this video and you're not added to one of those, please get in touch or have somebody that you know get in touch, and you can be added to those things. What I want to do is ultimately, even though my motives for doing this class are not mercenary by any means, I am a true lover of the books that I'm teaching and of students themselves. But since I no longer have a full-time job, I could use a little bit of extra income. And my plan is just to keep things reasonable, but then still hopefully to have you know, a little bit coming in. My plan is to charge $10 tuition per student per class. Now, for those who are joining me in person, that means that you can pay me at the door if you like, or you can pay up front. I think looking at the calendar, it looks like we're going to have 9 classes probably before Christmas. So to pay for this semester, that means it would be $90 a person. I can provide refunds if the class gets canceled for one reason or another, and hopefully a variety of payment methods can be accepted. I'm going to see about coming up with maybe a card swiper and have a, you know, a PayPal account that payments can be made to. Like I said, $10 per class per person. If this is a hardship, and believe me, I understand financial hardship, and you still want to participate, let me know. Maybe we can come to some sort of arrangement, you know, some sort of barter system or something like that. For those who are not going to be physically present, I still haven't got this kink worked out yet, but somehow I want to come up with a paywall for the videos. This first one I'm sending out free. The rest of them I want to charge people to watch. So I'm still figuring out exactly what the best platform for that is. One last thing about the videos. I don't want them just getting out there for public consumption. Even this first free one. My idea is to keep this limited. So if you know somebody that you want to share it with, please let me know first. Chances are I'll be perfectly okay with that. But do let me know, and please do not share this to social media or upload it to YouTube or anything like that with any of these videos. So thank you very much for that. Okay, lastly, everybody on the list should already know about this, but the first reading that we're going to be doing is the lives of St. Anthony, St. Martin of Tours, and St. Benedict. For those who don't know what I mean when I say their lives, I don't just mean read about their life, like you might read about them on Wikipedia or something. Life here is a technical term for a genre of literature that goes back to antiquity. These lives are works of literature written in Greek and Latin between the mid-4th and the late 6th century, in this case. The author of the life of Anthony is St. Athanasius the Great. Sulpicius Severus wrote the life of St. Martin, and the life of St. Benedict is actually the second book of a work called the Dialogues by St. Gregory the Great in the late 6th century. All 3 of these are available together in print in the Penguin Classics series in a volume called Early Christian Lives, translated by Carolyn White. You should be able to find new and extremely cheap used copies of that on Amazon. And then there are also online texts that I've linked to in the email that I've sent out, as well as on the Facebook page. So everybody should be able to get hold of those. If there are any problems, you can contact me by email and let me know. Next week when we have the next class, I'll give a brief kind of background and introduction to the works, and then begin discussing some of the details of the texts themselves as part of that class. So in the meantime, hopefully everybody will be able to get some or all of that reading done, and I hope to see more people at the class and see a few people ready to download the video when it's ready. I know this first video took me a while to get around to, but like I say, I may actually just go ahead and record while I'm delivering the lecture in the class next week, and then maybe I can get the video sent out much sooner next time. So, all right, thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy this. All right, bye-bye.